Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Randall. This is the McClures. We react, review, we make fun of, we laugh at stuff over here. Links are down in the description if you want to help support the channel. We're going to be checking out a Candace Owens episode today. She talks about who is George Soros. She has a great research team, so I bet you they came up with some good info. So I'm curious to see what they came up with. Ohio man, what's good, brother? Appreciate you stopping by. Let's get into this, see what she's talking about.
Happy Friday, everyone. Earlier this week, we talked about George Soros, and that was a name that sent a chill down a lot of people's spine. You guys wrote essentially to me in the comments and said, be very careful. A lot of you commended me on my bravery in taking on this topic because you realize how much power that he's amassed. So much power that if you mention his name on Twitter, which I did this week, there's a whole network of blue check marks who come at you and say, you're anti-Semitic. How dare you say anything bad about George Soros? He's Jewish. He's also doesn't really care that he's Jewish. Look at the way that he spends his money. He's anti-Israel. So
yeah, that is the weird thing about George Soros. If you talk negatively about him, they accuse you of anti-Semitism, but he's not even a Jew. I mean, like, from history, he's a Jew, according to his genes, but he's not pro-Israel or pro-Judaism like she's going into right here. So why is going against him anti-Semitic? He's not pro-Semitic, if that's a thing.
We went there, and we're going to go there some more today because I have a person on my show who quite literally wrote the book on George Soros. You're not going to want to miss this. That's what's coming up today on Candace Owens.
Junior Thompson, react to Channel 10 Remastered. We will look together. Yeah, I'm down, bro. I'm down. We'll get into it after this.
All right, guys, let's jump right into this. He is the content manager for Bongino Report. He's written several books debunking liberal lies and exposing top Democrats. His latest book, however, is the one that we are concerned with. It is entitled The Man Behind the Curtain, Inside the Secret Network of George Soros. Welcome, Matt Palumbo.
Candace, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so grateful you were able to join last second. I'm kind of obsessed now with learning more about George Soros. Obviously, he's been on the radar for a very long time, but I just feel that we are kind of reaching a pinnacle in this country, and every time something terrible happens, you can trace it back to his dollars. And so I want to really start with his origin story and where he came from, knowing that he controls an entire network of fact checkers, and every time people get close to his origin story, they say, no, that's not true. It's not real. We're the fact checkers that he's paying, and that's not right. So tell us about his childhood and his upbringing.
Right. Well, he grew up in Hungary and was there when the Nazis invaded. And, one of the great ironies of Soros is, we live in the everything is racist era of politics, and that's the pejorative against any center-right opinion. With Soros, it's everything is anti-Semitic. And Soros, for instance, can write a Wall Street Journal op-ed saying, I'm going to back all these left-wing prosecutors. But then if you or I were to report on it, then it becomes anti-Semitic because he happens to be Jewish. Well, he's, first of all, not a practicing Jew and did a lot of things that if any other person would do, I think, or anyone less powerful did as a child, would be criticized for it. So there's a sort of now infamous 60-minute interview he did. And the Nazis, when they would invade some of these areas, they would set up what they're called Jewish councils, and they would try to recruit local Jews from the population to carry out their bidding against other Jews. And, I think a lot of the Jews that participated may have, well, they were either forced to do it or may have believed they would have been spared from the Nazi brutality. But Soros was recruited into that. And when he was asked about it in 60 Minutes, the host, Steve Croft, asked him about it and gives him the out and says, like, well, surely you were forced to do it, and it's not something you'd want to do, and it must keep you up at night. And Soros very memorably gave this very, very
he was
cold
super
reaction
proud,
saying, no, it was something, or, if I didn't do it, someone else would have anyway, so who cares, was kind of the reaction. And really it was just the coldness of the response. And
I think even more than that, I've seen that clip before. I don't have it pulled up to show you guys. But he was almost gleeful. He was happy about it. It was a proud achievement for him. Ratting out people in attics, bro. He was into it. He was into it.
if he had just spun it and said, "Hey, there was a gun to my head," no one would have even minded the interview. But it was weird that he didn't even have the self-awareness to lie. Now that interview you mentioned, if Twitter's community notes actually does a decent job of fact checking, but even that video is getting fact checked by the community notes wrongly as out of context and all this. And that's sort of the defense, is that that clip has been taken out of context. Well, surprise, surprise, Soros's father wrote an autobiography. And in the autobiography, he talks about his son's upbringing and his son's participation with the Nazis, and said it was something he tried to dissuade George from doing and something that he seemed to enjoy doing. So his own
No way.
father.
Hold
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
I
yeah.
want to slow that down
Yes.
because I did not know this. So we
Mhm.
did show that clip
Yep.
on a couple of episodes ago, on Wednesday's episode, I believe. And you are correct. There's no way to take it out of context. He essentially
Correct.
says to him, "You are working under a Hungarian officer who was
Yeah.
tasked with going to conduct inventory on Jewish people's homes, Jewish people that were forced to leave." And he very much, as you said, gives him an out and says, "But, I'm
And
sure
he
you're
could
stuck
take it.
with guilt.
Yeah,
You're stuck with
yeah,
guilt and you're
yeah.
wrapped with guilt about this." And he really nonchalantly and very plainly says, "Absolutely not. Yeah, I was
Correct.
Yeah,
a
I'm good.
child and it's whatever. It would have been
Mhm.
somebody else. It's not a big deal." And it's very weird. It's very bizarre, not to say something along the lines of, "I didn't really understand it when I was a child, but in retrospect, this
Mhm.
was really horrific and I feel sad for these individuals and I
No,
wish
he
I
was
had
stoked.
known." But what you're saying now is that his father, and what is his father's name? Do you know off the top
So
of your
his,
head?
his father's name, yes, Tivadar Soros, and the book is called Masquerade, and the subtitle's like, I can't remember the exact subtitle, but it's something along the lines of like, inside George Soros's father's, whatever. But that's the gist of it. And throughout all of this, so the reason Soros's father sent George around this time to live with a guy that was only known as the Godfather, but he's the one who gave Soros a fake Christian identity during that time, and probably is the only reason Soros is alive today. Now, not it's been.
Hey, shout out to Leslie in the Rumble chat. Figured it out. Let's go.
In many, many decades, obviously, since then, I mean, almost a century, Soros not once in his public work, writings, speeches has mentioned this guy, has thanked him for what he did in saving his life. We only found out about the guy's identity after he passed away, and I think it was 2010 or 2011. So saved the guy's life, gets no thanks whatsoever, dies pretty much anonymously.
That's really interesting. And you said that person's name is public, in the public sphere?
Yeah. Yes. It's I'm drawing a blank on it, but the Daily Mail, I believe, was the one who broke the news, and obviously it's cited in the
Because
book.
I have this theory, and just looking at everything that he's done, it seems very bizarre that he has such hatred for
Mhm.
really the people that liberated him, right? If
Yeah.
he believed that the Nazis were so backwards and were so awful, how could he then spend his life having such contempt for Americans? Why would he be trying to foster the end of America?
See, I don't think that's the case at all. I think George Soros is pro-Nazi. I think they recruited him young. I think he bought into the propaganda, and I think he's pro-Nazi. Yeah, pretty much.
Why would he be wanting the
Well,
cities to be crime filled and releasing criminals onto the street via his district attorneys? It doesn't make sense. And so I said to myself, is it plausible that he was actually sympathetic to the Nazis because he was taken care of and he was protected and maybe he saw them through a different vein? I mean, your childhood, anybody's childhood, has a very serious impact on their lives, the way that you think. It's very difficult to get over the lessons that you learned from your childhood. And I'm wondering if he came out of that and was at all sympathetic to the Jewish people, or if he was more sympathetic to the people that took care of him throughout that horrible tragedy of the Nazis occupying Hungary.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually one of the things I get asked a lot is like, what motivates this guy? Because we can, the defund the police, the rogue prosecutors, it's a controlled experiment in a certain type of political policy, and it is unquestionably a failure. So it's like, well, Soros is a data-driven guy. His background's in finance. He's made billions. Of all people, he's probably better at analyzing data than I am. So, which means he knows the truth. So, the Occam's razor answer is the simplest one, which is he's just an evil guy. And what the exact, reason was, we don't exactly know. But
The
it just
answer is
cannot.
simple,
He's
bro.
not
He's
like your
evil.
neighborhood liberal who like wants librarians to get paid more. He legitimately has horrible ideas, and there's no there's no working theory behind why his ideas would work. Like I sound like I'm going to sound like my old economics teacher in college, but whenever you have an idea, she always would ask me like, well, you have to show me why you think this chain of events would be set off to cause this. So in his rogue prosecutors, like, okay, we cut police funding. Then what? How does anything get better? What is the process? And then, when they tried out things like, oh, we're going to boost mental health services and social services. And I go, okay, name one. And how does it get implemented? And okay, you want it better mental health. I think the new Chicago mayor said he's going to invest in mental health. Do we expect the Bloods and the Crips to sit down for couples therapy? I think it's a bit unlikely. So you just it's sort of the Matt Walsh. Just ask one very simple question, and that alone
Bloods
is
and
enough
Crips
to
are the
uproot
problem
really
in Chicago, but
ideology. But it's sad that we are really beyond a place in the debate where these sort of things even matter. We are in sort of a post-truth era of politics. And the fact that he's still funding these people goes to show. I mean, just 2 nights ago, I think it was, he scored the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That was his latest local victory, and he is not slowing down at all. And it has had the most success there.
I think that he hates America. And I'm fascinated by why he hates America, because, as I said, we were the liberators. So what does he believe is the version of events that should have happened following World War II, I think is the question to ask. He's decisively not pro-Israel, right? He's anti-Israel. He does not give, in all of the millions and billions that he gives, he doesn't give to any Holocaust memorial, nothing to having helped the Jewish people who had their lives ruined during World War II. So the picture, I mean, the obvious answer here is he doesn't like the result of World War II. He doesn't believe that the Western Hemisphere kind of getting all of this power following the end of this war is righteous. He believes it wasn't.
The wrong party won. He's still a Nazi. He's trying to bring back Nazi 2.0, which I think is what the New World Order is, dude. It's the Nazi wet dream.
Unrighteous ending. Now, in what specific capacity, I don't know, but I think it's very clear that he's not an idiot. He obviously knows that everything he's doing is forcing America into a spiral, is forcing the Western Hemisphere into a spiral. We also showed an interview with him on stage talking about how he was building a new Soviet Union, the Soros Soviet Union, so to speak. So let's talk about his network. Let's talk about just what he's doing on college campuses where children are quite literally becoming more and more dumb. Like, we're talking strictly based on their GPAs, not their GPAs, pardon, based on their IQ levels. We've never produced dumber kids, and yet we've never handed out more degrees. He is the man that is behind a lot of this. Talk about what he is doing at the university level in this country.
Yeah, I mean, the statistic I saw, I think, was that college grads today have the same IQ, I think, as high school grads in like the 40s. So it just shows how much the standards have fallen. Now, his college network has actually been like 3 or so decades in the making. His first school was founded back in Hungary. It was called Central European University. Now, one of the interesting things I stumbled upon when researching it is it's sort of like a digital archive, digital library. And I couldn't help but notice it's named after Antony Blinken's parents, who are Antony Blinken being our Secretary of State. So it turns out they are mega donors to Soros's causes. And if you read some of the annual reports for the Open Society Foundation.
Wait, did he just say his first school that he started is named after our current Secretary of State's family? Oh my God. The ancestral swamp.
In the beginning, it reads like a corporate report, and they have the names, like, Soros is first and other members of the organization. There are years where his parents are like the third and fourth people named in that order. And Blinken, after he assumed office, one of the first things he did was sanction a guy named Sali Berisha. No Americans know who he is, but he's an Albanian opposition leader, conservative, and very, very outspoken critic of Soros. And he gets sanctioned by Blinken right after Blinken takes his position. So it's just very interesting coincidences, of which there are none there. But in America, Bard College in New York seems to be like his anchor college. He's donated hundreds of millions to it and has pledged billions going forward. One of his ex-wives actually has her entire, I think it's an art department or history department at the college that he basically bought for her. And he has this thing called the Open Society University Network that the president of Bard is on the board of. And it's really just like a Soros coalition of U.S. colleges and international colleges. A lot of them if you look at like the faculty to student ratio, it seems a lot of them are doing a lot of research. So they're like it's kind of quasi think tanks that Soros has approved that also issue degrees. And I mean, the only irony is, how much different are they ideologically than every other college, maybe except Hillsdale? And the unfortunate reality is actually not much. It's just sort of the Soros label on our already kind of corrupt institution that seems to be seeing declining enrollment nationwide.
Am I correct that Orban banned Soros's? He tried to establish a college or university, some education initiative, and they flat out banned it. They have anti-Soros legislation in his home country of Hungary.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So Orban actually, he really went all out on this stuff. Like he used taxpayer dollars, and I wouldn't say we should go this far, but I would say you should always fund this. But he would put up like anti-Soros billboards. He did one thing that apparently really bothered Soros, according to his biographer, and that was if you walked into a public bus, they put photos of Soros's face on the floor, so people would have to walk over it when they're in public. So he, like, if you look at public opinion polling, it went in only a couple
Shout out Hungary. Shout out Hungary for being base. That's funny.
months from knowing who Soros is to everyone hating this guy. And yeah, so he kicked the college out of Hungary. It's actually, I think, in Vienna right now, headquartered there. But yeah, kicked him out. I think Soros himself legally can still enter the country, but he is not welcome there, and his network is not either.
Wow, that's super interesting. And by the way, when the Soros network, the media network, attacked this and attacked Orban, they basically hid behind the fact that he was, how could you do this to an American? How could you do this to somebody that's so involved with the EU, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, actually, everything that you do shows that you hate America, and then you hide behind an American identity when you want to do something horrible in Hungary. Similarly with the Jewish thing. He does things that are hurtful to Jewish people by using his tax dollars to fund certain initiatives. And then he goes, oh, but I am Jewish, you can't criticize me. He has this ability to do that, to completely gaslight you. And
speaking of gaslighting, he'll often fund something related to a cause. So like he's funded Black Lives Matter adjacent groups where they're not, okay, it's not the same group funded by Patrisse Cullors and the other ladies, but it's like, a movement for Black lives. And if you go on their website, it is an identical platform. It is the same types of protests. They literally want all the exact same things. And Soros has put like $50 million into those. And I saw one of the fact checkers like attacked you for saying Black Lives Matter. And the way they wiggled out of it was trying to do this whole shell game of, well, it's technically Black Lives Matter and such. And they're doing
they pass the money through a huge chain, but it does end up actually going to Black Lives Matter organizations. But he does it via, I think it's like, I forgot what his organization is called. It's like CARES or something. It's some long acronym.
He does that with the DAs too, where he will openly, like with Alvin Bragg. So Color of Change is this anti-police PAC. They say in May 2021, we want $1 million to support Alvin Bragg. 6 days later, Soros cuts them a check for exactly $1 million. So it's pretty obvious what's going on there. And the fact checkers are like, well, he didn't give the money, the PAC did, as if it was okay. It went through an extra hand, but like it would be like saying like, Joseph Stalin never killed anyone because other people did it. Like who are you?
I am a primary care physician, and
good for you, bro. We're excited for you. Super excited for that guy.
And apparently very dumb liberals, but not me, not us.
Well, he's relying on financial stupidity that people don't really understand how he can easily do this by saying, I'm going to give it through a 501c3, and then I am tasking the 501c3 to then give it to this individual or this organization, which is exactly what he does. And unfortunately, it seems to work because, as we've already mentioned, the education system has gone down the drain in large part due to a lot of his efforts, and people really don't have any fundamental understanding of how that works, which is another huge problem.
Do we really think that people are so dumb that they don't get that? I think they are, huh? I think they are. That's what's crazy. Like when I watch the news, I'm like, who believes this? Who believes what you're saying right now? Like, obviously this is dumb. Obviously this is dumb. And then I turn it off. But how many people watch it and actually believe what these people are saying? I think it's a lot. I think it's actually a lot. That's kind of scary.
In a society that is rife with anti-religious ideologies like the ones that we hear from the left on a daily basis, it can be incredibly challenging to ground oneself in what we know to be true and good. It's more important than ever to embrace our faith and start building a habit of prayer and the way. For brief, Jonathan, no prayer. that his tremendous success record with electing DAs across America. What is he after?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's like 90+%
of the
success
country.
rate. And like, he's donated tens of millions to presidential races, but when there's billions of dollars at stake, it's, $1 billion is enough, in the context, or sorry, $1 million in the context of a presidential race is like a peanut. But when it's a local race, especially ones that have low voter turnout, it makes all the difference. And as for what he's after, I mean, I kind of gave the answer earlier. He's just an evil guy. It seems like progressives really love chaos, and I am only assuming there is some strategic reason they have for it, and that they want to drive society to the brink, so that we go, okay, whatever you guys think will save this, we'll go for. But every policy they do,
there's definitely a strategy, because the more chaotic and violent and crazy you make society, the more society is going to lean on government to fix it. The more rights they'll give up. People are willing to exchange almost anything for safety. So if you make the world unsafe, then you can get the bartering happening. The exchange will begin.
it just makes things worse and worse. Crime goes up, so they cut police. So crime goes up, so they cut police. And one of the consequences of cutting police is it's generally the good police who leave. So you create an environment where police brutality is actually more likely to happen, which will then be used to further the same kind of policies. So it's just an endless cycle he creates everywhere. And I could not find really a single example of one of these rogue DAs where crime went down. The only cases where it did was when they stopped saying shoplifting was a crime. And then what do you know? There's not any shoplifting anymore. But you can redefine any crime out of existence with that logic. So there was a national crime wave in 2020, and in the places with Soros-backed DAs and the places where they defunded the police, it was even more pronounced and much more so. So it is just, we had a controlled experiment. It failed. And there are even a few cities, I thought this was interesting, that have restored police funding, but not mentioned it. So they would very publicly get out there and go, yeah, we care about Black lives and racism, so we're going to cut police. They realized, oh my God, we made a mistake. And instead of embarrassing themselves and going, okay, now we're going to do the actual real thing, they kept quiet on that. So it was just a weird inversion of what the incentive should be. I mean, cutting police should be the thing that's embarrassing, and restoring their funding should be the, hey, we're doing the right thing finally, the way it's presented. So that was just a weird oddity of that movement as well.
I also want to talk about his work in Ukraine. Can you speak to what he's got going on? Since we've got this Ukraine war at bay, and there's obviously a lot of corruption happening in that region, which people don't want to talk about.
Coming.
Well, that's so I wrote that before the war before the current phase of the war. But Ukraine has a huge role in that. When a lot of these post-Soviet countries broke down, when capitalist. When you're a formerly communist country, there's every asset is government owned. So there is this question of, well, who gets to own all these formerly government owned assets? And unfortunately, a lot of oligarchs kind of concentrated that among them. And Soros was one of these people who was able to buy up assets really on the cheap in many of these post-Soviet countries. That's been falsely presented as Soros being against communism and helping capitalism. But Ukraine is one of those countries, and he's maintained a very large presence there. He's donated hundreds of millions of dollars. He got Petro Poroshenko elected. And right after the election, Soros got basically not the equivalent of the Medal of Honor, but the highest civilian achievement you could give someone to, I guess, to a non-resident, and awarded it to Soros. And not long after that, Soros gets put on Ukraine's National Investment Council. So it's just very easy to see exactly where the money's going there. And another thing he did too, and this is sort of, prepare not to laugh, he's funded a so-called anti-corruption.
Well, that's an interesting concept. So if Soros isn't part of deciding where the money in Ukraine goes, then the $100 billion we're sending over there, Soros is in charge of where it goes. So is this just a refund payment to Soros from the American taxpayer for all Soros's help with the Democratic Party in enacting their agenda? Seems like it's just a huge money funnel, big ass money laundering scheme. This is what it seems like. That's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
organizations. One of them is called Ant-AC. It was co-funded with the FBI, actually. And
Unbelievable.
if you read the I don't know if it's a whistleblower letter, but whatever the initial document was alleging Trump during the Ukraine impeachment, the one alleging the quid pro quo, Ant-AC is actually cited 4 different times in it. So it's very interesting to see, hey, the FBI is trying to get Trump, Soros is trying to get Trump. We have this one anti-corruption organization in Ukraine, and what do you know? They're the ones claiming this dirt on Trump that even Zelensky of all people said was nonsense. So just very interesting seeing those forces come together. And you know, it raises the obvious question of where's our money in Ukraine going, given the history of corruption there. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't be sympathetic to their, them being invaded by a foreign country, but if we're not allowed to complain, like, is there any dollar amount where we are allowed to? Is it 200 billion? Is it 300 billion? And if not, like,
now, I don't know if this guy is not allowed to. I'm allowed to complain. I don't think we should be sending any money to Ukraine at all. We should tell Ukraine to either get on board, give Crimea over to Russia, leave them alone, stop shooting Russians with missiles, and let's get back to it. But no, we want World War III. You can't funnel a bunch of money through Ukraine if they're stable. So it doesn't benefit us. Stability doesn't benefit the politicians and the war industrial complex.
Like I remember once it was 10 billion, I was like, all right, enough for now, right? It's probably not going to get any more than this. And I think we've authorized 100 billion at this point. I know we haven't spent it all, but it really is never going to end.
Never-ending wars and money laundering and no way to know where a single dollar went. And if you ask the question, you're horrible, you're bigoted, you don't understand the plight of the Ukrainians. I mean, it's all the same stuff, which is, again, a form of gaslighting people, right? It's quite literally our hard-earned money, and it's not going to anything in our American society, which makes entirely no sense. But you brought up the FBI, and that's very interesting to me because that is something that is curious, to say the least. We understand what he is doing. We can see this plainly as the American people. We can see his corruption, and yet it seems that he is in some sort of an allegiance with the state because they're not interested in George Soros. They're allowing him to do it.
That's the other thing that's weird with George Soros. So everybody knows his plan. Everybody knows his agenda. Everybody knows exactly what he's doing. So is it legal? Is what he's doing legal? Do we not have any laws to stop billionaires who hate the country from destroying it with their money? Like, we don't have any laws to prevent this?
Whatever he wants to. In fact, it's his network of fact checkers that are immediately verified as the official state fact checkers during the elections. And these are the individuals that are allowed to call balls and strikes on what's true and what's false and whether or not you are allowed to have a platform. How has he been able to establish this relationship? I mean, shouldn't these people be butting heads? You are fostering these inner city communities to fundamentally collapse via these district attorneys, and you're telling me that the CIA and the FBI are completely okay with this, and they actually are giving you more power? How does that make sense?
Well, someone had an observation the other day because I think China put out some like anti-American, propaganda ad complaining, talking about our history of slavery and genocide, etc. And he had the observation. He's like, isn't it interesting that the anti-American propaganda on that topic coming out of the Biden administration is actually more severe and harsh than China's own anti-American propaganda? Like when they talk about our history and our culture and all that. And there are people in those agencies that are corrupted. I mean, I know Kyle Seraphin has been on Dan Bongino's show a lot talking about it, and he shared with me like privately like certain internal emails and stuff. And there's a lot of nut jobs working in those agencies. And Soros has insulated himself and that he does the sort of funding groups that fund groups, so there's plausible deniability. And then also he's a powerful guy, and it's sort of like with Jeffrey Epstein when we go, or Harvey Weinstein where we go, how did it take so long? Could be a similar thing where it's just like once. Sort of that analogy with like a SWAT team, like the first guy through the door is going to get shot, but the mission will be successful because of him. It's kind of like that. Like no one wants to be the first guy to expose the guy. And then, even in the end, if it works out, their reputation might get destroyed. And I know when Glenn Beck criticized him, he got harassed pretty severely, him and people, they started an advertising campaign against Fox. And he has, not, I have a whole chapter on his links to the media where like I find people on certain boards that Soros, like of organizations that Soros funds, that also work for major media outlets, and it's pretty much everyone. But he pretty much has one person at every publication that's sympathetic to him, and you can type his name into any publication I list in the book as being sympathetic, and every single article about him is either defending him or reframing criticism of him as, you know, an indictment of the people criticizing
he
him.
quite literally funds them. I mean, he does that via 501c3 vehicles. You know, I'm going to award this for journalism here, and then he places who he wants at these publications. That's what people don't realize, is that the media is quite literally bought and paid for, right? They pretend that they're doing this to honor journalists, when in reality, they quite literally have journalists in their pockets everywhere that go back to them and tell them things, which is one of the flaws of a capitalist society, by the way, is that you can buy whatever you want when you get to a certain level of wealth. And that's why when I consider how it's plausible that the FBI is not looking at this guy, and that they seem to be maintaining his power rather than trying to absolve him of it, I ask the question: is maybe he's got people in there? Maybe he's funding, quite literally funding people there. They don't. I mean, they'll never see the kind of money that George Soros could be giving somebody at the DOJ.
I would say absolutely. Like, I don't have a name, but it would be the most common sense conclusion ever, because he knows. I mean, there was actually in a chapter I have like leaked documents that got leaked out of his Open Society Foundation, and there was one. It was like a Rolodex of people in European Parliament that he saw as allies, and I think it was like close to 300 people of a parliament of 705, and it was just like a list of all their names, their numbers, why they're allies, and it was enough people where, if Soros-backed members of parliament were their own political party, it would be the biggest party in European Parliament. Wow. So, the question I think I posed in the book is like,
that's crazy.
Well, that's just what we know about an international parliament. What about the U.S. government? Like, what would it look like here? And it's undeniable that it would have to look somewhat similar with the Democrats, and even within the Biden administration, like on his transition team, there was, I think, there was more than a dozen people who were linked to Soros in one way or another, and most of it was like they worked for the Center for American Progress, which is, a John Podesta organization that Soros backs. But they're in the Biden administration. They're like Neera Tanden, Ron Klain, his former chief of staff, a lot of people with Soros connections. So if the people who have the president's ear are linked to Soros, that there is at least not a FBI agent of some rank that has been tainted, I don't see how it wouldn't be. And we saw with the whole Spygate saga, there may be factions of the FBI that are normal, but it's
not a FBI agent. It's clearly the majority of leadership in FBI is corrupted to the core. Whoever gets in as president next, hopefully Trump, really needs to clean house at the FBI. I think they say all the big brass is on the 7th floor. They need to fire everybody on the 7th floor. Like, we need you may need to dissolve the whole FBI and reorchestrate it, rebuild it from the ground up, because the corruption is so embedded, it may be impossible to weed out.
There's also ones that are completely corrupted, and to think that Soros has corrupted them when he's done this with the entire media, with European Parliament, with Hillary Clinton, with the Biden administration, it's, I think, almost common sense at this point. It would be a conspiracy theory to say he doesn't, I think.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I want to talk about DC Leaks as it relates to his work in promoting abortion in Catholic networks and his connections with Hillary. Can you speak a little bit about that? I know you mentioned it in the book.
Yeah, it's kind of like a miscellaneous chapter where
So he's anti-police, he's pro-chaos, and now pro-abortion also. Well, he's a fucking winner, isn't he?
Put like the most interesting leaks. So like the Hillary one is just sort of emails between Hillary and Podesta and Soros, kind of trying to figure out how to stay in his good graces and saying like, hey, maybe we should have a fundraiser for this cause Soros wants. And it's just a lot of kind of butt kissing from Hillary and Podesta, but it shows the power. The Catholic one, I think, there was this weird psychological strategy Soros wanted to implement where his logic was like, okay, we have Catholic voters where many of them, abortion is their one issue. So we can appeal to them on every single other issue. And as long as we're the pro-choice side, they're not going to vote for us. So it was sort of this effort to infiltrate a Catholic group and reframe the abortion issue as just one other issue of many. And I don't think it worked very well, but it was just an interesting psychological operation. And in a similar vein, and this didn't make it into the book, but there was like one group I found is sort of masquerading as a right-wing environmentalist group that turned out it was backed by Soros. And I'm wondering if that was the same strategy to like try to fool people against their own ideology. But yeah, that's what it showed. And I'm trying to think of other examples. There's just a lot of obscure things in that chapter, like, some Moldovan prime minister was paid off by Soros, just random stuff that I found that is of interest.
So I guess in conclusion, we have to talk about his legacy. A lot of people are like, well, George Soros is really old. He'll be dead soon and then it will be over. And I make them aware it will not be over. He does have a son, and his son.
All right, so he pays to elect the Maldives prime minister. Isn't Maldives where corporations set up like shell companies and do, money laundering, banking type operations? Isn't that like a Maldives kind of thing? I guess it would make sense to have the prime minister in your pocket.
Son is George Soros on wheels, if you will.
Yep.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what his son has been doing, what his son has been up to, and why this is not a concern that is going to go away.
Yeah, so his son Alex and also his son Jonathan are very active politically, but Alex more so. And if you go on his Instagram, his Facebook, it is every day it's one big party of who's the the leftist leader of the day he's meeting. So very he's almost like his father's ambassador, it looks like. Meeting with Schumer, Pelosi, and then all these just obscure people in Europe you never heard of. But his Open Society Foundation, in earlier writings of Soros, he sort of expressed doubt about keeping it going, and he sort of cited examples of past organizations that have gone beyond their founder's vision or kind of lost control of that. But he's packed his own board with two of his kids, and I think his wife also is on the board as well. So they share his ideology, so there's not really a risk of that happening. So he's been donating actually the majority of his fortune to his own foundation. And the example I give is Soros throughout his whole career rather, has donated about $20 billion. He has donated enough to his.
Wow. Soros's whole career, he's donated $20 billion. Wow. That's a lot of coin.
His foundation in recent years, where their endowment is $20 billion. So the amount they have on hand is equal to what he's spent his entire life. And, there's inflation and all that, but it's basically the same amount. And he can at least double the amount of damage he's done through his son. And I would say it's his, we know every generation gets sort of, the youth are slightly more cartoonishly progressive. So I would argue it's going to be even worse under him. But yeah, he's also is apparently aware of me and always hides my comments on his Twitter when I leave feedback.
Well, here's my question. Why isn't there an answer to this on the right? Like, you always hear these stories about someone like George Soros, the left giving all of this money. They seem to be better organized than people on the right and conservatives. Why is there not a person on the right who's got a $20 billion endowment that they're just giving to political causes? Why do we fail in this regard?
It's tough to know. I mean, it is unfortunately more socially acceptable for some reason, even though it shouldn't be, to donate to sort of, the general leftist cause of the day. And even when we do have right-wing mega donors, it's usually just on economic issues, which obviously that's great, but there's also these cultural issues that 100% of the time seem to get ignored. And we do need someone like that, or at least someone to expose what Soros is doing, because Soros really does not like other people pointing it out. And I suppose there's got to be a reason why. It must do some sort of damage at least. In fact, they did I wrote a series in the New York Post basically based off the book, and that's what finally prompted the Open Society Foundation to issue, I guess, what they thought was a rebuttal to me, but didn't address a single thing I said. So they definitely don't like criticism, and I would just say to everyone watching, anytime you see something Soros linked, you definitely point it out, but that's not what he wants you to do.
Perfect. Matt, your book is called The Man Behind the Curtain, Inside the Secret Network of George Soros. Where can people find you, and where can people find the book?
Inside
on
the
Twitter, at
secret.
Matt Palumbo 12, even though it's a horrible platform, though much better under Musk, I will say. And then the books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I think as wherever books are sold is what they say on TV. So those three.
Matt, thank you so much for joining today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, guys, that is all the time that we have for today. I hope that you enjoyed that interview as much.
All right, very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Let me know down in the comments what you think of George Soros. What's his ultimate plan? Is he a Nazi supporter? Does he want the Soviet Union to run the whole world? Is that the goal? What's going on? Let me know what you think. I appreciate you guys stopping by, though. Links in the description if you want to support the channel. www.mcclures.store is my website. If you want to buy quality American products, we sell them there. Helps your country, helps the channel, feeds my family, all that good stuff. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Later, bye.